Ciccio. Mi ammazzaste a mio marito. E chi non si può sapere.
What is your name?
Canopies my ass. That's a bitch cracking and chopped liver. You can say about.
Salgo de la ciudad inmediatamente. Le pido perdón. Can't you give me a straight answer anymore? Listen up, boy!
Non ci risi lì a parlare così, come si capisce ragione sta cosa qua?
You are personally responsible for the murder of a New York City police captain.
Oh, Michael.
Hello friends, if you are looking for a complete and in-depth review of The Godfather Part II, 1974, you've come to the right place. In today's video, we'll break down the full story, explore the powerful characters, and highlight the most important moments that make this legendary crime film unforgettable. So make sure to like, share and subscribe, and let's get started. The story begins by showing two different generations of the Corleone family, revealing how their lives are connected across decades. In the present, Michael Corleone has become the powerful head of the family, living in a luxurious Nevada estate and controlling the family's expanding business interests. Unlike his father Vito, Michael is colder, more calculating, and far more determined to transform the Corleone organization into a legitimate empire. He wants his family to move away from the old world of crime, but the deeper he goes into power, the harder it becomes to escape the violence surrounding him. At the same time, the story travels back to Sicily and introduces a much younger Vito Andolini. His childhood is destroyed when his family becomes caught in a deadly conflict with a powerful local crime boss. After losing the people closest to him, Vito is forced to leave Sicily and eventually travels to America as a young immigrant. Arriving at Ellis Island with almost nothing, he begins a completely new life in New York. He does not yet know that this frightened young boy will eventually become one of the most respected and feared figures in the criminal world. Years later, Vito is living in a poor neighborhood of New York and working hard to survive. He is married to Carmela and has a young family, but life remains difficult. Vito earns very little and struggles to provide for his wife and children. The neighborhood is controlled by Don Fanucci, a local criminal who uses fear and intimidation to collect money from shopkeepers and residents. Vito watches carefully and begins understanding how power operates around him. Unlike Fanucci, however, Vito does not simply rely on violence. He studies people, earns their trust, and waits for the right opportunity. Meanwhile, Michael's present day story becomes increasingly complicated. He is trying to protect the Corleone family while expanding their influence into new areas. His business dealings bring him into contact with powerful people, but the more successful he becomes, the more enemies appear around him. Michael understands that someone within his circle may be working against him, and he becomes determined to identify the threat before it can destroy his family. The contrast between young Vito and older Michael becomes one of the central ideas of the story. Vito begins with nothing and slowly builds his power through relationships, loyalty, and careful decisions. Michael begins with enormous power but becomes increasingly isolated because he trusts fewer and fewer people. One is building an empire from the ground up, while the other is struggling to protect an empire that is already beginning to crack from within. As young Vito becomes more confident, he starts recognizing opportunities that can change his life. He understands that the people around him are desperate for someone who can stand up to Fanucci. Vito does not seek power simply for wealth. He wants security for his family and respect within his community. Slowly, his reputation begins to grow, and people start turning to him when they need help. Back in the present, Michael's problems become more serious when an attack is carried out against him and his family. The incident makes it clear that someone knows his movements and has access to information from inside his organization. Michael becomes suspicious of everyone around him, including people he once considered close allies. Rather than reacting emotionally, he begins quietly investigating the situation and preparing to discover who is responsible. At the same time, Vito's path toward becoming a powerful figure is only beginning. His experiences in America teach him that survival requires patience, intelligence, and the ability to earn people's loyalty. Every decision he makes brings him closer to becoming the man who will eventually establish the Corleone family's reputation. As the two timelines continue unfolding side by side, the audience begins to see a powerful difference between father and son. Vito's rise is built around family and community, while Michael's struggle for control is slowly pushing him away from the very people he wants to protect. Both men are willing to do whatever is necessary for their families, but the choices they make will lead them toward very different futures. In the present day, Michael Corleone's position as the head of the family appears stronger than ever, but beneath the surface, his empire is surrounded by danger. After the attempted attack on his home, Michael knows that someone close to him may have provided information to the people who wanted him dead. He does not panic or reveal what he is thinking. Instead, he becomes even more careful, quietly observing everyone around him and trying to determine who could possibly have betrayed the family. Michael understands that the greatest danger may not come from an enemy standing outside his organization, but from someone sitting at the same table. Michael's business dealings also become increasingly complicated as he attempts to expand the Corleone family's influence in Nevada and Cuba. He wants the organization to become more legitimate and financially powerful, but the people around him are interested in completely different things. Some want control, some want money, and others want revenge. Michael realizes that maintaining an empire requires constant negotiation, and every agreement creates another person who may eventually become an enemy. Even though he presents himself as calm and confident, the pressure is beginning to affect his relationships with the people closest to him. Meanwhile, Michael's marriage to Kay is becoming increasingly distant. The two once imagined building a different kind of life together, but Michael's involvement in the family business has changed him. Kay can see that he is becoming colder and more suspicious, and she struggles to understand the man he has become. Michael believes that everything he does is necessary to protect his family, yet his obsession with control is slowly destroying the emotional connection between them. Their home may be filled with wealth and security, but there is an increasing sense that something important has disappeared between them. The story then returns to Vito's younger years in New York. Vito has become more confident and capable, but he remains focused on providing for his wife and children. He understands that poverty leaves people vulnerable to criminals like Don Fanucci, who uses his position to intimidate everyone around him. Vito watches Fanucci carefully and begins realizing that the man is not nearly as powerful as he wants everyone to believe. Fanucci depends heavily on fear, while Vito believes genuine loyalty can create a much stronger form of power. Vito's reputation slowly grows as he helps people in the neighborhood. He does not demand respect through constant threats. Instead, people begin trusting him because he listens to their problems and finds ways to help them. One of the most important examples is his relationship with Clemenza, who recognizes Vito's intelligence and potential. Through these connections, Vito starts entering a world where illegal opportunities are available, but he remains careful about every step. He knows that one careless decision could put his family in danger. Eventually, Vito sees an opportunity to challenge Fanucci's control over the neighborhood. Fanucci attempts to use his authority to demand money from Vito and his associates, believing that fear will force them to obey. But Vito understands that Fanucci's power depends on everyone believing he is untouchable. Instead of openly confronting him, Vito carefully studies his movements and waits for the right moment. His patience reveals the difference between reckless violence and calculated action. When Vito finally decides to act, he does so with complete determination. The confrontation changes his position within the neighborhood and establishes the beginning of his reputation as someone who can protect people from those who exploit them. The people around him begin looking at Vito differently. He is no longer simply another poor immigrant trying to survive. He is becoming a figure of influence, someone whose word carries weight. Back in Michael's timeline, the investigation into the attempted assassination continues. Michael suspects that the attack could only have happened because someone with access to his private information helped the enemy. He begins testing the loyalty of the people around him without telling them what he knows. Every conversation becomes a quiet interrogation, and every unusual reaction becomes another piece of evidence. Michael's paranoia grows because he realizes that even the people closest to him may have hidden motives. One person Michael continues dealing with is Hyman Roth, an older and extremely powerful businessman with deep connections to organized crime. Roth presents himself as an ally and speaks respectfully about Michael's family, but Michael does not completely trust him. Their relationship is built on business rather than genuine friendship, and Michael knows that Roth has his own interests. Both men understand that cooperation is useful, but neither is willing to reveal everything they know. Michael also becomes increasingly concerned about his brother Fredo. Fredo has always been less confident and less capable than the other members of the family, and Michael often treats him as someone who needs protection. However, Michael begins noticing details that make him question whether Fredo may know more about the attempted attack than he has admitted. The possibility is difficult for Michael to accept because Fredo is not simply another member of the organization, he is his brother. While Michael struggles with betrayal, Vito continues building his life in America. His family grows and his children begin looking up to him with admiration. Vito works to create a secure future for them, determined that his children will never experience the poverty and helplessness that defined his early years. His growing influence allows him to provide opportunities for his family, but he never forgets the suffering that brought him to America. The two timelines now begin reflecting each other more clearly. Vito is gaining power because people increasingly trust him, while Michael is losing trust in the people around him despite having far greater authority. Vito's family gives him strength, whereas Michael's family is becoming a source of suspicion and emotional conflict. Both men believe they are protecting the Corleone name, but their methods are taking them in completely different directions. As Michael continues investigating the conspiracy against him, he realizes that the enemy may be much closer than he expected. Every answer creates another question, and every person he trusts seems to have something they are not telling him. He knows that he cannot afford to make a mistake because the future of the Corleone family depends on his decisions. Yet, the more Michael tries to control everything around him, the more isolated he becomes. At the same time, young Vito's reputation continues spreading throughout the neighborhood. People begin approaching him for help because they believe he can solve problems that the authorities ignore. Vito sees this as an opportunity to build something lasting for his family. He does not yet know how far his journey will take him, but the foundations of the Corleone empire are already being created through the choices he makes during these difficult years. The story continues moving between father and son, showing how one generation builds the power that the next generation inherits. Vito's rise is only beginning, while Michael's empire is already facing threats from every direction. As their stories move forward, the audience can see that the Corleone family's greatest strength, its loyalty to family, may eventually become the very thing that causes its deepest wounds. Michael Corleone continues trying to uncover the person responsible for the attack on his home, but he understands that revealing his suspicions too early could make the situation even more dangerous. He quietly studies the behavior of everyone around him, especially those who have access to his private affairs. His relationship with Hyman Roth remains complicated because Roth continues presenting himself as a trusted business partner while secretly pursuing his own interests. Michael knows that Roth is extremely intelligent and experienced, so every conversation between them becomes a careful exchange in which neither man says more than necessary. Michael begins realizing that the conspiracy against him is not simply about money or territory. It is about gaining control over the Corleone family itself. The situation becomes more difficult when Michael travels to Cuba for an important business opportunity. The country is filled with wealthy businessmen, political figures, and organized crime leaders who are benefiting from the existing government. Roth and his associates see Cuba as a place where they can expand their influence and make enormous profits. Michael is interested in the financial opportunity, but he remains cautious because he understands that political instability could destroy everything. While attending meetings and celebrations, he watches the people around him carefully, knowing that the alliances being formed could determine the future of his organization. As Michael observes the situation in Cuba, he begins noticing signs that the government is losing control. Ordinary people are increasingly unhappy and revolutionary forces are becoming more powerful. The wealthy criminals and businessmen around Michael continue behaving as though nothing can threaten their position, but Michael realizes that the situation is far more unstable than they believe. He understands that the empire they are trying to build could disappear overnight if the political system collapses. His ability to recognize danger gives him an advantage, but it also makes him increasingly distrustful of everyone around him. During this period, Michael's relationship with Fredo becomes especially important. Fredo has been trying to prove himself within the family, but he lacks Michael's confidence and authority. He often feels overlooked and embarrassed because his younger brother has become the powerful head of the Corleone organization. Michael has protected Fredo for years, yet Fredo secretly carries resentment because he believes he deserves greater respect. This weakness makes him vulnerable to people who know how to manipulate him, and Michael begins to sense that something is wrong even though he cannot yet prove it. The Cuban situation eventually reaches a dramatic turning point when revolutionary forces begin taking control of the country. The people who have been celebrating their wealth and influence suddenly realize that their world is collapsing around them. Michael watches as the government loses control and understands that Roth's plans are no longer safe. The wealthy criminals begin desperately searching for ways to escape, while Michael focuses on getting himself and his family out safely. The events prove one of Michael's deepest beliefs, that power can disappear much faster than it is built. Back in the past, Vito Corleone continues establishing himself in New York. After confronting Don Fanucci, Vito's reputation grows quickly. People begin coming to him when they need protection or assistance, and Vito earns their loyalty by helping them without demanding unreasonable payment. Unlike the criminals who rely entirely on fear, Vito understands that people will remain loyal to someone who treats them with respect. This approach slowly transforms him from a poor immigrant into a respected figure within the neighborhood. Vito's family also benefits from his growing influence. He is able to provide a better home for Carmela and his children, giving them opportunities that would have been impossible when he first arrived in America. Vito takes great pride in his family and wants his children to have a future far better than the one he inherited. His experiences in Sicily taught him that weakness can leave a family vulnerable, so he becomes determined to build enough power and security that nobody will ever be able to threaten his loved ones again. Vito's friendship with Clemenza and other members of the neighborhood becomes stronger as his reputation continues growing. He understands that an organization cannot be built by one person alone. He needs people he can trust, and those people need to believe that he will protect them in return. This mutual loyalty becomes one of the foundations of the Corleone family's future. Vito is not simply creating a criminal operation. He is creating a network of relationships that will eventually become one of the most powerful organizations in America. In Michael's timeline, however, family relationships are becoming increasingly complicated. His marriage to Kay continues deteriorating because she can no longer accept the life Michael has created. Michael believes that his actions are necessary to protect the family, but Kay sees the violence and secrecy surrounding their lives as something that will eventually destroy them. Their disagreements become more serious, and Michael responds by becoming even more controlling. Instead of solving the emotional problems inside his marriage, he tries to use the same methods of control that he uses in his business. Michael's suspicions about Fredo become stronger when he learns that Fredo has connections to people who may have been involved in the conspiracy. The discovery is deeply painful because Fredo is his older brother, someone Michael has always believed should be loyal to the family. Michael begins questioning whether Fredo knowingly betrayed him or whether he was simply manipulated by people who took advantage of his insecurity. Either possibility creates a serious problem because Michael cannot allow a potential traitor to remain close to him. At the same time, Roth continues working behind the scenes. He understands that Michael is becoming suspicious, so he carefully maintains the appearance of cooperation. Roth's greatest advantage is that he does not appear to be Russian. He allows other people to take risks while he remains protected. Michael recognizes this strategy and becomes increasingly determined to understand exactly what Roth wants. Their conflict becomes a battle of patience, with both men waiting for the other to make the first major mistake. Michael returns from Cuba with a much clearer understanding of how dangerous his situation has become. The political collapse he witnessed there has shown him that even the most powerful people can lose everything in a matter of moments. Now he is back in Nevada, but instead of feeling safer, he becomes even more suspicious of the people around him. The attempted attack on his home, the strange behavior of Fredo, and the continuing influence of Hyman Roth all point toward a much larger conspiracy. Michael knows that someone close to him has betrayed the family, and he begins quietly preparing for the moment when the truth finally comes out. Fredo's behavior becomes increasingly difficult for Michael to ignore. Michael has always protected his older brother, even when Fredo appeared incapable of handling serious responsibilities. But now Michael learns that Fredo had been connected to Johnny Ola, one of Roth's associates. Fredo insists that he did not understand the full consequences of his actions, claiming that he was simply trying to prove himself and gain some respect. Michael listens carefully, but the explanation does not remove his suspicion. For Michael, the most painful part is not simply that Fredo made a mistake, it is the possibility that his own brother helped the people who tried to kill him. Michael confronts Fredo privately and demands to know what he has been hiding. Fredo becomes emotional and admits that he had been manipulated because he felt ignored and humiliated within the family. He explains that he wanted to be treated as someone important instead of always being compared with Michael. His resentment made him vulnerable, and people like Johnny Ola recognized that weakness. Fredo insists that he never intended for Michael to be killed, but Michael realizes that intentions do not erase consequences. The betrayal has already happened, and the trust between the brothers is permanently damaged. At the same time, Michael's relationship with Kay reaches another breaking point. Kay has become increasingly unhappy with the life Michael has created for their family. She does not want their children growing up surrounded by violence, secrecy, and fear. Michael believes that everything he does is necessary to protect them, but Kay sees the opposite. She believes his obsession with power is destroying the family he claims to be protecting. Their arguments become more intense, and Michael responds by trying to maintain control instead of understanding her fears. While Michael's family begins falling apart emotionally, Vito's story continues showing how the Corleone family was originally built. Young Vito has become respected throughout his neighborhood, and people increasingly turn to him when they need protection or help. His reputation grows because he does not abuse his influence unnecessarily. Vito understands that loyalty cannot be forced forever. People must believe that helping him will also improve their own lives. This philosophy becomes an important part of the organization he is creating. Vito's family is now living a more comfortable life, and he takes pride in being able to provide for them. Carmela sees the changes in her husband and understands that he is becoming a man of influence. Vito remains quiet and careful, never allowing success to make him reckless. His experiences have taught him that enemies can appear suddenly, so he continues watching everyone around him. He wants his children to grow up safe, but he also knows that the world outside their home can be cruel. As Vito's reputation spreads, he begins encountering people who want to use his growing influence for their own benefit. Vito recognizes the difference between genuine loyalty and people who simply want access to his power. He becomes skilled at reading people's intentions and deciding who deserves his trust. These abilities help him expand his network and establish relationships that will eventually become the foundation of the Corleone family's future. His rise is not sudden. It is built through years of careful decisions. Back in the present, Michael begins taking action against the people he believes are responsible for the conspiracy. He knows that openly attacking his enemies could create unnecessary attention, so he relies on patience and strategy. Michael understands that Roth is extremely difficult to reach because he has powerful connections and people willing to protect him. Instead of confronting him directly, Michael begins creating circumstances that will weaken Roth's position. His goal is to remove the threat without revealing exactly how much he knows. Michael's investigation also brings him into conflict with the political and business figures surrounding his organization. Some people want him to cooperate, while others want him removed because his growing influence threatens their interests. Michael has to negotiate carefully, knowing that every conversation could contain hidden motives. His empire is expanding, but expansion brings more enemies and more responsibilities. The more powerful Michael becomes, the less he is able to trust anyone. Fredo's betrayal remains the most painful issue of all. Michael has spent years believing that family loyalty was the one thing that could never be questioned. Now he knows that even his own brother was capable of making a decision that put everyone at risk. Michael does not immediately act against Fredo because he still carries memories of the brother he once protected. But emotionally, something changes between them. Michael no longer looks at Fredo with the same trust, and Fredo realizes that he may have lost his brother's respect forever. The contrast between Vito and Michael becomes even clearer. Vito builds his organization by creating relationships with people who believe he will protect them. Michael, on the other hand, increasingly depends on secrecy and fear because he believes betrayal is everywhere. Vito's family becomes larger as his power grows, while Michael's family becomes more isolated despite his enormous wealth. Both men want to protect the Corleone name, but their different approaches are slowly producing completely different results. Michael also begins preparing for the possibility that Roth may eventually try to escape his reach. He understands that time is important and he cannot allow his enemies to regroup. Every move must be carefully planned because one mistake could expose his intentions. Michael's cold determination becomes stronger as his personal relationships continue collapsing. He begins treating almost every problem as a strategic calculation, even when the problem involves people he loves. Meanwhile, Vito's journey takes him to a point where he is no longer simply surviving in America. He has created a reputation, built wealth, and established a network that can protect his family. The young immigrant who arrived with nothing is becoming the man who will eventually be known as Don Vito Corleone. His rise shows how the Corleone legacy began long before Michael inherited the family business. As the two stories continue moving forward, the connection between father and son becomes more tragic. Michael inherited the empire Vito built, but he also inherited the responsibilities and dangers that came with it. Vito wanted his children to have security, while Michael becomes consumed by the need to maintain that security at any cost. The same family name that once represented protection and unity is now becoming a source of fear and suspicion. By the end of this part, Michael has made up his mind that betrayal cannot be ignored, even when it comes from someone within his own family. Fredo's mistake has created a wound that Michael cannot easily forgive, while Roth remains the central enemy behind the larger conflict. At the same time, Vito continues building his influence in the past, unknowingly creating the powerful legacy that Michael will one day inherit. The Corleone family is becoming stronger financially, but the emotional cost of that power is becoming impossible to ignore. Michael Corleone's suspicion has now turned into a much deeper crisis because the danger surrounding him is no longer limited to outside enemies. He knows that the attempted attack on his home could only have happened because someone had access to information about his family and security. The discovery that Fredo had been connected to Johnny Ola makes the situation even more painful. Michael cannot simply treat the betrayal like another business problem because Fredo is his brother, someone he protected for years. Even though Fredo insists that he never intended to help anyone kill Michael, the fact remains that his actions gave Michael's enemies an opportunity to get close. Fredo tries to explain himself, admitting that he felt humiliated by the way Michael treated him. He had spent years watching his younger brother become the most powerful member of the family, while he remained the one nobody trusted with important responsibilities. Fredo wanted recognition and believed that working with people connected to Hyman Roth might finally give him a position of importance. He claims that he did not understand the entire plan and never realized that his actions could lead to an attack on Michael. But Michael has learned that ignorance does not make betrayal harmless. He listens to Fredo's explanation without showing much emotion, yet inside the damage is already done. Michael's relationship with Kay is also collapsing. She has reached the point where she no longer believes that Michael's promises about protecting the family can justify the life they are living. Their children are growing up surrounded by secrecy and fear, and Kay wants something completely different for them. She wants a normal family life away from violence and criminal power. Michael sees her concerns as a threat to the stability of his household, but Kay sees Michael's obsession with control as the real danger. Their marriage becomes increasingly cold, with both of them realizing that they no longer want the same future. Meanwhile, Michael continues working against Hyman Roth. Roth remains one of the most dangerous people in Michael's world because he rarely exposes his true intentions. He prefers to operate through other people, allowing them to take the risks while he remains protected. Michael understands this strategy and knows that confronting Roth directly could be disastrous. Instead, he begins building a plan that will allow him to weaken Roth's position without giving him enough warning to escape. Every move becomes part of a larger game between two men who understand power extremely well. Michael's business interests also bring him into contact with powerful political figures. His attempt to expand the family's influence into legitimate business has created opportunities, but it has also placed him in situations where corruption and organized crime overlap. Michael wants to present himself as a respectable businessman, yet his enemies know that the Corleone organization still depends on methods that cannot easily be separated from its criminal past. The contradiction becomes one of Michael's biggest problems. He wants legitimacy, but the people around him continue pulling him back toward the world he claims he wants to leave. The story then returns to Vito's younger years, showing how different his rise to power is from Michael's struggle. Vito has already established himself as a respected figure in his neighborhood, and people now come to him when they need help. He is becoming known as a man who can solve problems when the authorities cannot. Vito does not waste his influence by creating unnecessary fear. Instead, he carefully builds relationships and makes people feel that supporting him will also protect their families. This approach allows his reputation to spread naturally. Vito's relationship with Carmela remains one of the most important parts of his life. Despite his involvement in illegal activities, he wants to give his family a stable and comfortable future. He remembers the poverty and violence of his childhood and does not want his own children to experience the same helplessness. Every step he takes toward greater power is connected to his desire to protect them. His family is not simply an excuse for his ambitions, it is the reason he believes those ambitions are necessary. Vito's growing reputation also attracts people who want to become part of his circle. Clemenza and others recognize that Vito has qualities that make him different from the criminals who depend only on violence. He is patient, observant, and capable of understanding what people want. Vito knows that loyalty is valuable, but he also knows that loyalty must be earned. He begins developing a small organization around himself, creating the early structure that will eventually become the Corleone family. As Vito becomes more powerful, He also becomes more aware of the responsibilities that come with influence. People begin expecting him to solve their problems, protect their businesses, and defend them from criminals. Vito does not simply see these requests as opportunities to make money. He sees them as opportunities to create a network of people who will remember his help. This mutual dependence becomes the foundation of his future power. Slowly, the neighborhood begins treating Vito as a man whose word carries more authority than the people who officially control it. Back in the present, Michael's problems with Fredo continue affecting the entire family. Michael cannot openly reveal everything he knows because doing so could create panic and expose the weakness inside the organization. Instead, he keeps Fredo at a distance while quietly observing him. Fredo understands that Michael no longer trusts him, but he does not know what Michael intends to do. This creates an uncomfortable tension whenever the brothers are together, because both know that their relationship has changed permanently. Michael also begins realizing that his obsession with protecting the family has made him emotionally isolated. He has surrounded himself with guards, advisors, and loyal soldiers, yet he feels increasingly alone. The people closest to him are either afraid of him, hiding things from him, or questioning his decisions. Even his marriage is falling apart. Michael once believed that becoming powerful would give him the ability to protect everyone he loved, but now he is discovering that power can create distance between people. The contrast with Vito becomes increasingly tragic. Young Vito is surrounded by people who respect him and genuinely appreciate his help, while older Michael is surrounded by people whose loyalty he constantly questions. Vito's power grows because people believe in him. Michael's power grows because people fear what will happen if they oppose him. Both men are intelligent and determined, but their understanding of family and loyalty has developed in very different directions. Michael's plan against Roth continues moving forward, and he becomes more careful about revealing his intentions. He knows that Roth has powerful connections and may try to escape if he senses danger. Michael therefore waits for the right opportunity rather than acting emotionally. His patience shows how much he has changed from the younger man who once wanted to stay away from the family's criminal world. Now he is deeply involved in that world, and he is willing to use its rules against anyone who threatens him. At the same time, the story continues showing Vito's transformation from an immigrant struggling to survive into a respected criminal leader. He is not yet the legendary Don Corleone known by everyone, but the foundation of that identity is already visible. His ability to remain calm, understand people, and protect those who trust him makes him increasingly powerful. Each decision brings him closer to creating the family empire that Michael will later inherit. The two timelines now feel like two different paths created by the same family. Vito builds his power because he wants to give his family security, while Michael becomes consumed by protecting the empire Vito created. The original purpose slowly becomes buried beneath the need to maintain control. Michael believes that every sacrifice is necessary, but the people around him are beginning to pay the price for his decisions. By the end of this part, the conflict has become deeply personal. Michael is preparing to deal with Roth, but the greatest emotional wound comes from Fredo's betrayal and Kay's growing rejection of the life he has created. Meanwhile, Vito's rise continues, showing how the Corleone family's power was originally built through patience, loyalty, and community. Michael has inherited the empire, but he is beginning to realize that maintaining it may cost him the very family he wanted to protect. Michael Corleone's world is becoming increasingly unstable as the conflict with Hyman Roth continues and the situation inside his own family grows more painful. He has spent years building his authority and making sure that nobody can threaten the Corleone organization. But the attempted assassination has shown him that even his strongest defenses can fail. The discovery of Fredo's involvement makes everything more complicated because Michael can deal with an enemy much more easily than he can deal with a brother who betrayed him. Fredo continues trying to explain that he never wanted Michael dead, but Michael knows that his brother's actions created the opportunity for the attack. From this point forward, their relationship can never return to what it once was. Michael begins carefully separating himself from people he no longer trusts. He becomes more secretive and rarely reveals his full plans, even to members of his inner circle. His organization continues operating, but everyone can sense that Michael is carrying a heavy burden. He is no longer simply trying to expand the family business. He is trying to identify every possible threat before it reaches him. This constant suspicion changes the atmosphere around him. Conversations become cautious, meetings become private, and even small mistakes are treated as potential signs of betrayal. At the same time, Michael's marriage to Kay reaches an extremely difficult stage. Kay has become exhausted by the constant tension surrounding their family. She knows that Michael wants to protect their children, but she believes the lifestyle he has chosen is exposing them to a different kind of danger. Michael refuses to accept that his methods are destroying the family because he sees himself as the person responsible for keeping everyone safe. Kay, however, no longer sees him as the protector she once believed he could become. She sees a man whose need for control has taken over his entire life. Michael continues focusing on Hyman Roth because he understands that Roth remains connected to the conspiracy against him. Roth has managed to maintain the appearance of an old friend and business partner, but Michael knows that appearances cannot be trusted. Roth is surrounded by people who are willing to work for him, and he has connections powerful enough to make direct confrontation extremely risky. Michael therefore chooses patience. Rather than rushing toward revenge, he waits for an opportunity that will allow him to strike without exposing his own weaknesses. The story then shifts back to Vito Corleone's younger years, where his rise is taking another important step forward. Vito has become respected in his neighborhood, and people increasingly recognize him as someone who can solve problems. He understands that the power he is gaining comes from the trust of ordinary people. When someone comes to him for help, Vito listens carefully and offers a solution. His influence grows because people begin believing that he will protect them when nobody else will. Michael Corleone becomes increasingly determined to regain control over the situation surrounding his family. The attempted assassination has left him suspicious of almost everyone, and the discovery that Fredo had been connected to Johnny Ola has created a wound that cannot easily be repaired. Michael does not immediately reveal what he intends to do, but his silence makes it clear that he has not forgotten Fredo's betrayal. At the same time, Hyman Roth continues presenting himself as a business partner, forcing Michael to maintain a careful relationship with a man he believes is working against him. Every meeting between them becomes a quiet battle of patience, with both men trying to discover what the other knows. Michael's efforts to move the Corleone family toward legitimate business also begin facing serious obstacles. He wants the organization to become financially secure, without depending entirely on traditional criminal activities. But the people surrounding him continue creating problems. Political connections, old enemies, and business partners all have their own interests, making it difficult for Michael to separate his family from the world he inherited. He understands that becoming legitimate would require more than simply changing the appearance of the business. The entire structure of the organization would have to change, and Michael is beginning to realize how difficult that will be. Kay, meanwhile, has become increasingly distant from Michael. She no longer believes that his constant promises of protection will give their children the normal life she wants for them. Michael insists that everything he does is for the family, but Kay sees how his decisions have changed him. The man she once hoped would leave the criminal world behind has become completely consumed by it. Their conversations become tense, and Michael's inability to understand Kay's fears pushes their marriage even closer to collapse. The story returns to Vito's earlier years in New York, where his growing reputation continues transforming his life. Vito is no longer the powerless immigrant who arrived in America with nothing. He has built a network of people who respect him and rely on him for protection. His relationship with Clemenza and the other members of his growing circle becomes stronger, and together they begin creating a small organization that can operate throughout the neighborhood. Vito understands that the organization must have rules and loyalty if it is going to survive. Vito's approach to power remains different from the criminals who came before him. He does not want people to fear him without reason. Instead, he wants them to understand that helping him means gaining protection and stability. When shopkeepers and neighbors come to him with problems, he listens and finds ways to help them. This creates a bond between Vito and the community that becomes more valuable than simple intimidation. People begin remembering his kindness, and those memories eventually become the foundation of his influence. As Vito's position grows, he begins thinking beyond the neighborhood. He sees opportunities to create a better future for his family and realizes that the small network he has built could become something much larger. Vito is patient because he knows that rushing could destroy everything. He carefully chooses the people who work with him and avoids unnecessary conflicts. His ability to wait for the right moment becomes one of his greatest strengths. In Michael's timeline, however, patience has a different meaning. Michael waits because he wants to make sure that his enemies cannot escape. He knows that Roth is extremely difficult to reach and that attacking him without a perfect plan could expose Michael's own organization. Michael therefore continues gathering information and watching the people connected to Roth. He is convinced that the conspiracy against him is much larger than a single betrayal, and he wants to uncover every connection before making his final move. Fredo's position within the family becomes increasingly uncomfortable. He knows Michael suspects him, and he begins to understand that the consequences of his actions may be permanent. Fredo had wanted recognition and respect, but his decision to cooperate with Roth's people has achieved the opposite. He has lost Michael's trust and placed himself outside the inner circle. His regret becomes clear, but regret cannot undo what happened. Michael's relationship with Fredo is especially painful because their conflict represents something much larger than a business disagreement. Michael remembers the older brother who was once part of his childhood and family life, but the man standing before him now has become connected to the people who tried to destroy him. Michael has always believed that family loyalty was absolute. Fredo's betrayal forces him to question that belief, and the emotional consequences begin affecting the way Michael sees everyone around him. As the investigation continues, Michael learns more about the connections between Roth and the people who had access to his private affairs. The evidence becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. Michael realizes that his enemies did not simply want to scare him, they wanted to weaken his organization and eventually take control of his business interests. This makes the conflict more dangerous because Michael knows that if he shows weakness, others will immediately try to exploit it. At the same time, Vito continues establishing the traditions that will later define the Corleone family. He understands the importance of respect, loyalty, and family gatherings. His home becomes a place where people feel protected and welcome, and Vito uses these relationships to strengthen his position. Although his methods are still part of the criminal world, there is a sense of community around him that Michael's empire will eventually lose. The parallel between father and son becomes more powerful as the story progresses. Vito begins with nothing and gains everything through patience, while Michael begins with everything and slowly loses the emotional connections that once mattered most. Vito sees power as a tool for protecting his family, while Michael increasingly treats power as something that must be constantly defended. Their goals may appear similar, but their methods are leading them toward completely different lives. Michael eventually prepares for a confrontation that could determine the future of the Corleone family. He knows that Roth will not simply disappear, and that his enemies are waiting for an opportunity to strike again. Michael begins making plans that involve several layers of secrecy, ensuring that no single person knows everything. This strategy protects him from another betrayal, but it also increases the distance between Michael and the people closest to him. Meanwhile, the younger Vito continues his rise, becoming a respected figure whose influence reaches beyond the immediate neighborhood. His family is now living a more comfortable life, and Vito has achieved something he once thought impossible. He has created security for the people he loves. Yet his rise also means becoming increasingly involved in a dangerous world where power must always be protected. The choices he makes now will eventually shape the reputation and structure of the Corleone family for generations. By the end of this part, Michael is closer to understanding the full conspiracy against him, but the emotional damage inside his family is becoming impossible to ignore. Roth remains a dangerous enemy. Fredo's betrayal hangs over everything, and Kay is preparing to make decisions that could permanently change Michael's personal life. At the same time, Vito's rise continues to show the beginning of the Corleone legacy. One generation is building the family empire, while the next is fighting desperately to keep it from collapsing. Michael returns his attention to the people closest to him as the pressure around the Corleone family continues to grow. He understands that the conflict with Hyman Roth cannot be solved through ordinary business negotiations, because too much has already happened behind the scenes. Michael continues gathering information while carefully hiding his real intentions. At the same time, he keeps Fredo away from sensitive matters, making it clear that the trust between the brothers has been badly damaged. Fredo realizes that Michael knows more than he is saying, but he is unable to repair the relationship. Michael's problems with Kay also become more serious. She has reached the point where she can no longer accept the life Michael has chosen. She wants their children to grow up away from violence and secrecy, while Michael believes that his power is the only thing keeping the family safe. Their different views create an emotional distance that becomes harder to overcome. Michael remains focused on controlling the situation, while Kay begins thinking about how she can protect herself and the children from the life he has created. Meanwhile, Vito's story continues, showing the early development of his organization. His reputation has spread throughout the neighborhood, and more people come to him for help. Vito carefully maintains relationships with those who support him, understanding that loyalty is more valuable than fear. His influence continues growing because people believe that he will protect them when they need him. The young Vito is becoming the foundation of the Corleone family that Michael will one day inherit. As Vito becomes more successful, he remains deeply connected to his family. He wants his children to grow up with opportunities that he never had, and he takes pride in providing them with a better life. His success allows the family to move away from poverty, but Vito understands that his position also brings danger. He continues making careful decisions, knowing that one careless move could threaten everything he has built. In the present, Michael's investigation begins revealing more about the people working with Roth. He realizes that the conspiracy is connected to business interests as well as personal revenge. Roth wants to weaken Michael's position and gain greater control, while Michael wants to eliminate the threat before it spreads further. Neither man is willing to back down, and their conflict becomes a battle of patience and strategy. Michael also begins accepting that his family may never return to the way it was before. Fredo's betrayal has permanently changed the relationship between the brothers, and Kay's unhappiness has created another painful division. Michael has spent years believing that family unity was the greatest protection he could have. But now, the family itself is becoming the source of his deepest problems. The contrast between Vito and Michael becomes clearer than ever. Vito builds his influence by earning loyalty, while Michael increasingly relies on secrecy and control. Vito's family grows closer as his power increases, whereas Michael becomes more isolated, despite having greater wealth and authority. Both men believe they are protecting the Corleone name, but their different choices are leading them toward very different futures. As Michael prepares his next move against Roth, he becomes even more careful. He knows that his enemies are watching him and that any obvious action could expose his plans. He keeps his thoughts private and allows others to believe that everything is normal. Behind the scenes, however, he is preparing to settle the conflict once and for all. At the same time, Vito continues building the foundations of the Corleone empire. His connections become stronger, his reputation spreads, and his family gains greater security. The man who once arrived in America with nothing has now created a position of influence through patience and determination. His journey shows how the Corleone name became powerful long before Michael ever took control. By the end of this part, Michael's enemies are closer to being exposed, but the cost of his struggle is becoming clear. Roth remains a major threat, Fredo has lost Michael's trust, and Kay is emotionally preparing to separate herself from Michael's world. Vito's past, meanwhile, continues showing the family at its foundation, a time when loyalty and family still stood at the center of everything. Michael Corleone now understands that the conflict surrounding his family has reached a point where he can no longer rely on trust alone. The people closest to him have become difficult to read, and the betrayal involving Fredo has changed the way Michael views the entire organization. He continues keeping his plans secret while preparing to deal with Hyman Roth and the people connected to him. Michael knows that Roth has been operating from a position of safety for a long time, but he also understands that Roth's greatest weakness is his belief that he can always stay one step ahead. As Michael continues investigating, the pressure inside his personal life becomes even stronger. Kay is no longer willing to accept the constant fear and secrecy surrounding their family. She wants to protect their children from becoming part of Michael's world, while Michael believes that his control over the family is the only thing preventing their enemies from destroying them. Their arguments reveal how completely different their views have become. Michael sees sacrifice as necessary, while Kay increasingly sees that sacrifice as destroying their family from within. Michael also keeps Fredo at a distance. Fredo desperately wants to repair the relationship, but Michael's trust has disappeared. Fredo's mistake was made because he wanted recognition, yet the consequences have become far more serious than he ever expected. Michael knows that Fredo was manipulated, but he cannot ignore the fact that his brother's actions helped the people who attacked him. The emotional tension between them becomes impossible to hide, and Fredo realizes that his place within the family may never be restored. The story then returns to Vito's rise in New York. Vito has become a respected and influential figure, and the people around him increasingly depend on his protection. He understands that the community's loyalty is one of his greatest sources of strength. Rather than ruling through constant intimidation, Vito creates relationships based on favors, respect, and mutual protection. His reputation continues spreading, and the Corleone family begins taking shape around him. Vito's success allows him to give his wife and children a better life. He is proud that his family no longer has to struggle with the poverty he experienced as a young immigrant. His children look up to him, and Vito remains deeply connected to them despite the dangerous world surrounding his business. His rise is motivated by the belief that power can protect the people he loves, and this belief becomes one of the central principles of the Corleone family. Back in Michael's timeline, his strategy against Roth begins moving towards its final stage. Michael understands that direct confrontation could create unnecessary risks, so he continues working through carefully planned moves. He wants Roth to believe that he is still safe, while Michael quietly removes the protection surrounding him. Every decision is made with the possibility of betrayal in mind, and Michael refuses to give anyone enough information to compromise the plan. The political and business world around Michael also becomes increasingly unstable. His attempt to expand the family's legitimate interests has brought him into contact with people who have their own ambitions. Michael realizes that money and influence can attract allies, but they can also attract people who will betray him when a better opportunity appears. His growing paranoia may seem excessive to others, but after what happened at his home, Michael believes that trusting too easily could cost him everything. Meanwhile, Vito's organization continues growing. Clemenza and the other people around him become increasingly important to his operations, and Vito learns how to balance business with personal relationships. He understands that the organization will survive only if the people within it believe that they are part of something larger than themselves. This sense of loyalty becomes one of the strongest foundations of the Corleone legacy. The difference between father and son becomes increasingly tragic. Vito's power creates a sense of belonging, while Michael's power creates distance. Vito is building something that his family can inherit, but Michael is struggling to preserve that inheritance while losing his connection to the people who matter most. The audience begins to understand that Michael's greatest enemy may not be Roth at all. It may be the loneliness created by his own choices. Michael's determination eventually leads him toward a final decision concerning Fredo. He cannot simply forget the betrayal, because doing so would create a dangerous weakness within the organization. Yet, Fredo is still his brother, and Michael's memories of their childhood continue affecting him. The conflict between family loyalty and the need for control becomes one of the most painful choices Michael has ever faced. Kay's position also becomes clearer. She has reached the point where she believes that Michael's world is beyond repair. She does not want their children to grow up believing that violence and secrecy are normal parts of family life. Michael tries to maintain authority within the household, but Kay's decision making shows that she is no longer willing to accept his control. Their marriage is approaching a point from which it may never recover. Vito's story, meanwhile, reaches another important stage as his influence becomes established. He has gone from a frightened immigrant with no power to a respected man whose decisions affect an entire community. His success proves that patience and relationships can build an empire, but it also establishes the criminal structure that Michael will later inherit. Vito may have built the foundation for the family, but Michael will have to live with the consequences of that foundation. As Michael prepares to finish his struggle with Roth, he becomes more emotionally detached than ever. He no longer reacts openly to threats or insults. Instead, he watches, waits, and makes decisions quietly. The man who once wanted to protect his family has become someone who believes that survival requires complete control. Every enemy becomes a problem to eliminate, and every betrayal becomes something that must eventually be answered. By the end of this part, Michael's plan is nearing its conclusion, but his personal life is falling apart. Roth remains the final major enemy. Fredo's betrayal continues haunting him, and Kay is preparing to make a decision that will permanently change their relationship. At the same time, Vito's rise has brought the Corleone family to the point where its legacy is firmly established. Michael now stands at the center of that legacy, but the closer he gets to defeating his enemies, the more alone he becomes. Michael Corleone's plan against Hyman Roth finally begins moving toward its conclusion. After spending so much time studying his enemies and keeping his true intentions hidden, Michael is now ready to make the decisions he believes are necessary to protect the Corleone family. Roth has spent years building connections and using other people to carry out his plans, but Michael understands that the best way to defeat him is to remain patient until the right opportunity appears. At the same time, Michael has already decided that the betrayal inside his own family cannot simply be forgotten. The situation with Fredo becomes one of the most painful moments in Michael's life. Fredo had betrayed Michael because he wanted respect and recognition, but Michael sees the consequences rather than the intention. He knows that Fredo's actions helped create the circumstances that allowed the attempted assassination to happen. For Michael, family loyalty has always been the most important rule, and Fredo crossed a line that Michael cannot forgive. Even though Fredo is his brother, Michael believes that the security of the entire family must come first. As Michael's plans move forward, the Corleone organization begins removing the remaining threats around him. Michael's strategy is not based on one dramatic confrontation, but on several carefully planned actions. He makes sure that his enemies have limited opportunities to respond, while people loyal to him quietly carry out his instructions. By the time his opponents understand what is happening, Michael's position is already much stronger. The same patience that once helped Vito build his empire is now being used by Michael to defend it. Meanwhile, Michael's marriage to Kay reaches its breaking point. Kay has finally decided that she cannot continue living under Michael's control. She has seen how his world has affected their children and believes that escaping from that environment is the only way to protect them. Michael refuses to accept her decision because he sees the family as something that must remain together. Their confrontation reveals just how far apart they have become. Michael believes that his actions are sacrifices made for his family, while Kay believes those very actions have destroyed the family they once hoped to build. The story continues showing Vito's earlier life and how the Corleone legacy became so powerful. Vito has now become a respected figure in New York and his organization is growing stronger. People come to him because they believe he can protect them from criminals and corrupt authorities. Vito understands that every favor creates a relationship, and these relationships eventually become the foundation of his influence. His rise is not simply about wealth, it is about creating a network of people who believe they owe their loyalty to him. Vito's family remains at the center of his life. He enjoys watching his children grow and takes pride in giving them opportunities he never had. His success allows the family to move into a better life, but Vito never forgets the hardship that shaped him. He remembers losing his own family in Sicily and understands why protecting the people he loves has become such an important part of his identity. His past continues influencing every decision he makes. Back in the present, Michael's enemies begin falling one by one. The organization surrounding Roth loses some of its protection, and Michael's position becomes stronger. Roth, however, remains difficult to reach because he has powerful connections and continues using other people to protect himself. Michael understands that defeating Roth will require more than simply removing his associates. He must make sure that Roth has nowhere left to turn. Fredo's fate becomes increasingly inevitable. Michael does not openly discuss his decision with the family, and the silence surrounding the matter is significant. Fredo has returned to the family circle, believing that perhaps his brother may eventually forgive him. Michael watches him carefully, but there is no longer the warmth that once existed between them. Fredo may have apologized, but Michael's trust has been destroyed, and Michael believes that some betrayals cannot be repaired. At the same time, Michael becomes more isolated than ever. His victory over his enemies does not bring him happiness. Instead, every successful move seems to remove another person from his life. He has wealth, authority, and control, but he is losing the emotional connections that once gave those things meaning. Michael's greatest tragedy is that he has achieved the power he wanted while slowly losing the family he wanted that power to protect. Vito's story provides a powerful contrast. When Vito was building his organization, he believed that power existed to create security for his family and community. He remained close to the people around him and valued personal loyalty. Michael has inherited the same desire for protection, but his methods have become much colder. The audience can see that Michael is not simply repeating his father's life. He is taking the Corleone legacy in a direction that may ultimately destroy him emotionally. The final conflict with Roth approaches as Michael's plan reaches its last stage. Michael knows that Roth will attempt to survive at any cost, but he has already anticipated many of the possible escape routes. The struggle between them has become a battle between two men who have spent their lives understanding power, betrayal, and survival. Michael is determined to make sure that Roth can never threaten his family again. As the pressure reaches its highest point, Michael's world becomes increasingly quiet. The chaos that surrounded him earlier has been replaced by carefully controlled decisions. His enemies may believe that they are still negotiating and protecting themselves, but Michael has already made many of his choices. He is no longer trying to understand whether betrayal occurred. He is deciding what must happen because of it. The story's two timelines now reach a powerful emotional connection. Young Vito has successfully created the Corleone family from almost nothing, while Michael has become the powerful successor who now controls everything Vito built. Yet the very empire that gave Michael authority has also separated him from his wife, damaged his relationship with his brother, and left him almost completely alone. The legacy has survived, but the family unity that once gave that legacy meaning is disappearing. By the end of this part, Michael has effectively secured his position, but victory feels very different from what he once imagined. Roth's power is collapsing, Fredo's future has been decided, and Kay is preparing to leave him. Michael has protected the Corleone empire, but the cost of that protection is becoming painfully clear. He has won the battle for power, yet he may be losing the people for whom he wanted that power in the first place. Michael Corleone now stands at the point where nearly every major threat surrounding him has been dealt with, but the victories have left him emotionally isolated. Hyman Roth's influence has been weakened, the people connected to the conspiracy have been removed, and Michael has managed to protect the Corleone organization from collapse. Yet, none of this brings him the peace he expected. Instead, Michael finds himself surrounded by silence. The empire is still standing, but the family that once gave him a reason to fight for that empire has been deeply damaged. Kay has made her feelings clear, and Michael realizes that their marriage may never return to what it once was. She no longer trusts his promises and believes that their children need to be separated from his criminal world. Michael cannot understand how Kay could walk away from the family after everything he has done to protect them. But Kay sees his actions from a completely different perspective. To her, the violence and secrecy are not protection. They are the very things destroying their home. Their relationship has reached a point where love alone cannot repair the damage. Michael's thoughts repeatedly return to Fredo. The betrayal has become one of the most painful events of his life because Fredo was not simply another member of the organization, he was his brother. Michael remembers their childhood and the years when Fredo depended on him, but those memories now exist alongside the knowledge that Fredo's actions helped put his life and family in danger. Michael has always believed that family loyalty must come before everything else, and Fredo's betrayal has forced him to make a decision that he never wanted to face. Fredo does not fully understand how serious his situation has become. He continues hoping that Michael will eventually forgive him, especially because he has admitted his mistakes and expressed regret. He tries to remain close to the family and believes that time might heal the relationship between the brothers. But Michael has already made his decision. He does not show anger or hatred toward Fredo. Instead, his cold silence reveals something much more tragic. Michael has reached a point where personal emotions can no longer change what he believes must be done. Meanwhile, the story continues looking back at Vito Corleone's younger life, showing the final stages of his transformation into the powerful Don the world will eventually know. Vito has built a respected organization in New York and has become a man whose name carries enormous influence. His journey from a frightened immigrant to a powerful leader demonstrates how much his life has changed. He began with nothing, but through patience, relationships, and determination, he created a future for his family that once seemed impossible. Vito's success is also shown through his relationship with his children. His family has grown, and the Corleone household has become a place filled with relatives, friends, and trusted associates. Vito enjoys these moments because they represent everything he worked to achieve. He wanted his children to grow up surrounded by security and opportunity, and for a time, it appears that his dream has come true. The family is united, and Vito remains at the center of that unity. This becomes an important contrast with Michael's present. Vito's greatest strength is the emotional bond he maintains with his family, while Michael's greatest weakness is the distance that has developed between him and the people he loves. Vito builds an empire and remains surrounded by family. Michael inherits that empire but becomes increasingly alone. The difference suggests that power itself is not necessarily what destroys a family. It is what a person becomes willing to sacrifice in order to maintain that power. Michael's final moves against his enemies continue unfolding. Hyman Roth, who once seemed almost impossible to reach, has lost much of the protection surrounding him. Michael has spent years preparing for this moment, and now the consequences of those preparations are becoming clear. He has removed the people who threatened his organization and ensured that the Corleone family will remain powerful. Yet, his victory does not feel like a celebration. Instead, it feels like the end of something important inside him. The fate of Fredo becomes the darkest part of Michael's victory. Michael chooses to let the decision concerning his brother be carried out away from his direct presence, allowing the family to maintain the appearance of normality. Fredo is unaware of what is coming and spends his final moments believing that he may still have a place within the family. The tragedy lies in the fact that Michael once protected Fredo as a brother, but now the same family loyalty that Michael valued above everything has become the reason Fredo cannot remain part of his future. Michael's decision shows how far he has traveled from the young man who once wanted nothing to do with his father's criminal empire. In the beginning, Michael believed he could protect his family without becoming like his father. But over time, he became more deeply involved in the same world, eventually making decisions that even he once might have considered impossible. He has become powerful enough to control almost everything around him, yet he cannot control the consequences of his own choices. The final moments involving Fredo are especially painful because they take place against the background of family memories. The Corleone family once represented unity, celebration, and loyalty. Michael remembers those earlier days when everyone was together, before betrayal and power struggles changed their lives. The contrast between those memories and the present shows exactly what Michael has lost. He has preserved the family name, but the warmth and trust that once existed inside the family are nearly gone. As the story moves toward its conclusion, Michael is left sitting alone with the consequences of his life. The empire remains under his control, but the people who once surrounded him have disappeared or become distant. Kay has separated herself from him, Fredo is gone, and Michael's relationship with the rest of the family is increasingly defined by authority rather than affection. He has achieved almost everything he wanted in terms of power, but the emotional cost is enormous. The story then returns to Vito's past once again, emphasizing the difference between the beginning and the end of the Corleone family's journey. Young Vito's dream was to create a safe and respected family after losing everything in Sicily. He built a powerful organization because he believed it would protect the people he loved. Michael inherited that organization and expanded it far beyond what Vito could have imagined. But in doing so, he gradually sacrificed the very relationships that gave the organization meaning. The final contrast between father and son becomes the heart of the story. Vito's rise represents the creation of the Corleone family, while Michael's story represents the cost of maintaining its power. Vito dies surrounded by the life he created, while Michael's final years are marked by isolation and regret. One man gains power while building his family around him. The other gains even greater power while watching his family slowly disappear. Michael remains seated in silence, surrounded by memories of a time when the family was still together. He has won countless battles and survived enemies who wanted to destroy him, but there is no enemy left for him to defeat now. The real consequences are inside him. Michael has become the unquestioned leader of the Corleone Empire, yet The loneliness surrounding him shows that power cannot bring back what has already been lost. The Godfather Part II ultimately reveals that the greatest tragedy of Michael Corleone is not that he became powerful, it is that he became so determined to protect his family that he eventually destroyed the connections that made that protection meaningful. Vito built the Corleone legacy through family, loyalty, and community, while Michael preserved the legacy through fear, secrecy, and control. Their stories together create a powerful portrait of how an empire can rise through one generation and become a source of destruction in the next. The story of The Godfather Part II reaches its final and most emotional stage as Michael Corleone is left to face the consequences of everything he has done. His position as the head of the Corleone family remains secure, and the enemies who once threatened his empire have been defeated or pushed away. Hyman Rod's plans have failed, and Michael has successfully protected his organization from those who wanted to take control of it. But despite winning the battle for power, Michael discovers that there is very little left for him to celebrate. The people he once wanted to protect have become distant, and the family he fought so hard to preserve has been permanently changed by his decisions. Michael's relationship with Kay has already been destroyed by years of conflict and secrecy. Kay no longer believes that Michael can give her the life she wants for herself and their children. She understands that Michael's world will always involve danger, control, and violence, and she refuses to allow that world to define the future of her children. Michael cannot accept the idea that she would leave him after everything he has sacrificed, but Kay has reached a point where she believes staying with him would be even more damaging. Their separation becomes another painful reminder that Michael's victories have come at an enormous personal cost. The most tragic part of Michael's story remains his relationship with Fredo. Fredo's betrayal was driven by insecurity and a desire to finally be respected, but his decision ultimately destroyed the trust between the brothers. Michael could understand Fredo's weakness, but he could not forgive the fact that his actions placed the entire family in danger. Once Michael decided that the betrayal could never be ignored, there was no way for the brothers to return to their former relationship. Fredo's fate becomes a symbol of how completely Michael's understanding of family loyalty has changed. Michael's memories of his family make the situation even more painful. He remembers a time when the Corleone family was together, before the power struggles, betrayals, and violence separated them. Those memories show Michael what he has lost. He has spent years building an empire that is stronger than ever, but the emotional foundation of that empire has disappeared. The family name survives, but the warmth and trust that once gave the name meaning are fading away. The film's return to Vito's past makes this contrast even stronger. Young Vito arrived in America as a frightened immigrant with almost nothing. He had lost his family in Sicily and was forced to begin a new life in a country he barely understood. Through patience and determination, he created a new family and built a position of power that allowed him to protect the people around him. His story is about creation, creating a home, creating an organization, and creating a legacy that could survive after him. Michael's story, however, is about the consequences of inheriting that legacy. He does not have to build the Corleone family from nothing because Vito has already created the foundation. Instead, Michael's challenge is maintaining and expanding it. He becomes more powerful than his father ever was, but the methods he uses gradually isolate him. The more he tries to control every possible threat, the more difficult it becomes for anyone to remain emotionally close to him. The final comparison between father and son shows the tragedy at the center of the entire film. Vito's greatest achievement is not simply the wealth or influence he created, it is the family he built around himself. Michael achieves greater financial and political power, but he struggles to maintain the same sense of family connection. His empire survives, but the man who controls it becomes increasingly alone. Michael eventually sits by himself, surrounded by the memories of the people who shaped his life. There is no longer a major enemy standing in front of him, no battle that needs to be fought, and no business deal that can repair what has been lost. The silence surrounding him becomes more powerful than any confrontation. Michael has reached the top of the world he entered reluctantly, but at the top he finds loneliness instead of happiness. The final moments also make it clear that Michael's transformation was not caused by one single decision, it happened gradually. Every time he chose control over trust, every time he answered danger with greater force, and every time he sacrificed a personal relationship for the protection of the family, he moved further away from the man he once wanted to be. By the time he realizes what his choices have cost him, there is no simple way to return to his old life. Vito's legacy, therefore, becomes both a gift and a burden. He gave his children security, wealth, and a powerful family name, but he also created an organization surrounded by violence and conflict. Michael inherits everything his father built, including the responsibilities and dangers that come with it. His tragedy is that he believes he must preserve the legacy at any cost, even when the cost is the loss of the people he loves. The final image of Michael's isolation carries the emotional weight of the entire story. He has survived enemies, betrayal, political changes, and countless conflicts. But survival has not made him happy. His empire remains powerful, yet he is separated from the family that once gave him purpose. Michael wanted to become strong enough that nobody could ever hurt the Corleone family again, but in the process, he became the person who caused some of the deepest wounds within it. The Godfather Part II, 1974, ultimately tells two connected stories about power, family, ambition, and the price of protecting a legacy. Vito Corleone rises from poverty and tragedy to build a powerful family, while Michael inherits that power and transforms it into an empire. One generation creates the Corleone legacy, while the next discovers how difficult it is to preserve without losing the human relationships that made it valuable. In the end, Michael has everything a powerful man could want: wealth, influence, authority, and control. But he no longer has the family unity that Vito once treasured. His greatest victory becomes his greatest tragedy, because there is nobody left with whom he can truly share it. The story closes not with the celebration of an empire, but with the quiet realization that power cannot replace love, trust, or family. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing movie breakdowns. See you in the next video.